The Carney-Trudeau Liberal policies that doubled housing costs, doubled food bank lineups, doubled our national debt, and sent $500 billion out of our country to the United States were wrong before. They are absolutely dangerous now.
We also have some more psychopathic tendencies coming out of Justin Trudeau and his Liberal caucus and all of their lovely ideas that we're obviously going to rip to shreds and fact check. And there is a theory, a school of thought that I'm going to introduce you to today that is very, very important for you to pay attention to over the next couple of weeks, because it is happening all around us, and it is what the Liberals are doing to gain power and to reclaim back the hearts of anybody who was wanting to switch before, they started using a mass media psyop to lie to them and convince them that Mark Carney was a really good idea, for example. I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. Lots to get through today. Subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. Give me a follow on other social media platforms as well.
For the last 9 years, Canada has been run by exactly the type of contemptible elitists who are, if anything, even more anti-capitalist, anti-nationalist, and anti-industrial state than the typical Canadian. This has set us up against our putative American allies in a manner much deeper than we want to think. And don't be thinking that any of this is lost on Trump. He clearly despises the recently departed Justin and has as much respect for those who elected him as he does for the Democrats, so much like them, who tortured, tormented, and despised him, and the flyover country MAGA middlebrows, who were so much wiser in their political instincts than their Ivy League wannabe masters. Canadians are Democrats in Trump's view, except more so. We think that's a virtue. It's not. It's a liability in all general manners.
The psychological operation that is taking place under our very noses, very much constructed intentionally by our media. And you've been seeing this all over CTV News. It's like every second article has something to do with Canadians boycotting the US, which I personally find to be unbelievably ridiculous. And it goes to show how isolated the Canadian public is from real news and from multiple sources of media. Because if you go into the United States, they're not panicking over 25% retaliatory tariffs from Canada. They're not panicking over any of this stuff because they know that Trump isn't actually going to make Canada a 51st state. They know that it's a negotiating tactic. And to see the way, with just the fear and terror that our media is making this out to be because it benefits the Liberals in the polls, compared to how American media is talking about all of this, is just so overwhelmingly frustrating. And let's not forget how people were treated just a few short years ago for having any pride in their country.
Why did you steal the flag from my 13-year-old daughter?
I stole the flag from you.
No, she was carrying it.
Oh, yeah.
She was carrying it, you stole
it. I love how you have an excuse as to why you indoctrinated your... Hey. Shh. Get out of my city. Get out of my city. Get out of my city.
Hey, police!
Understand?
Police, please!
You're acting like children!
Police, please!
It's weird how we go from that just a few short years ago to those same people now calling for unity, now saying, wave your maple leaf. Wear your pride high.
Can we be honest? Most of the people that are suddenly patriotic online about Canada don't actually love Canada. They just hate Donald Trump. These are the same types of people who've continued to participate in performative activism no matter what the hell the thing is. These are the types of people who are cheering on the removal of statues of Queen Victoria and Sir John A. Macdonald because we're a colonial genocidal state, but are now arguing that Canada is the greatest country on the planet and we need to defend it with violence. The funny thing is that these people are arguing that Canada needs to be more economically viable, needs to be more independent, and I completely agree with them and have been shouting this from the rooftops for the last 5 years. These same people are the ones who have consistently voted for the Liberal Party of Canada.
How is anybody in Canada supposed to feel prideful about our nation when for years we have been taught that everything about us is horrible, everything about us is awful and ugly? We need to rename streets. We need to pay people all kinds of money because of the terrible things that our ancestors did. We need to have statues removed. No, being patriotic means that you're a bad person, you're a racist, you're a misogynist. The government paid influencers, this is a fact, they paid influencers during the convoy days to reiterate that messaging.
After the Freedom Convoy adopted the Canadian flag as a symbol, many people started seeing it as a symbol of protest. Donald Trump, of all people, seems to have broken that connection. Flag manufacturers say the maple leaf has regained its place as a symbol of Canadian unity.
You don't have to look far to see the flag flying outside businesses, on billboards, or even plastered on the windows of houses in defiance of the U.S. president.
We're not Americans. We don't want to be Americans.
University of Calgary professor David Berkison says Trump touched a nerve in Canada, and this patriotic push may be permanent.
I think that what Mr. Trump has done is to push us in the direction of more pride than I've seen in this country in a long, long time.
I'm just going to do my darndest to spew off some facts for you, okay? And you better listen up and pay attention to this, because you need to know this and you need to share this with people, because there are so many people in this country who don't know this and who just follow whatever the messaging is, not realizing that they are being lied to and manipulated. Fact: Canadian media receives massive government subsidies through programs like the $600 million bailout fund for newspapers and CBC's $1.3 billion annual taxpayer funding. Fact: legacy media aggressively attacks independent outlets. There are dozens of reports of them doing this. Things like Rebel News, True North, Western Standard. They have all been called fringe. They've been called misinformation. Fact: media has disproportionately focused on discrediting voices that challenge the Liberal government, aka COVID restrictions, aka Pierre Poilievre's policies, aka trucker convoy. Fact: Canada does have censorship and Canadian content laws. Algorithms do not work the same way in this country that they do in other countries. Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act, forces platforms such as YouTube, TikTok, and Netflix to promote specifically Canadian content. That Canadian content is determined by the CRTC, the government body that I was once regulated under when I worked for traditional media.
Who suppresses freedom of speech and enterprise the most? You'd surely say North Korea, Iran, Russia, but what if I told you Germany should be on that list, or for that matter, France? Or Canada, where I'm from, should be on that list too. I'm not saying these countries are the same as the fear-based authoritarian societies of North Korea and Iran, not by a long shot. But I am suggesting that some of the free countries are not, in fact, living up to their promises of liberty, and that many allies of the US have gotten in the habit of using the government against political enemies or disfavored companies.
Here's a fact: many Canadian users have noticed that their feeds are being manipulated and pushed towards things like CBC, CTV, and other state-favored outlets, especially once Bill C-11 and Bill C-18 officially passed. Fact: algorithms are forced to boost government-approved narratives under the guise of Canadian content, while independent content creators are suppressed. This isn't a conspiracy. This is very, very well documented. The Canadian Broadcast Standards Council is very left-leaning in their social standards. This is a fact. We know Ezra Levant was actually fined and forced to issue a retraction because he called George Soros a Nazi collaborator, a former Nazi collaborator, even though there is historical evidence to prove those claims. Mainstream outlets very rarely get sanctioned for smearing conservatives. I know this for a fact after working in them for 11 years, but right-leaning hosts oftentimes do face consequences for questioning mainstream narratives. I also know this. You can be fined as much as like $1,000, sometimes over $1,000 if you say something that hurts people's feelings or is disinformation. That is true. That is true in this country. And you wonder why there are so many people who are absolutely clueless. It's because of all of these facts. It's because of the narrative. It's because of how controlled the government is, particularly liberal viewpoints are, in pushing the narrative, pushing the media bias. Let's move on to some of the facts about the PSYOP that has been running in this country through our government, particularly the liberal ones, and through the mainstream media. This is very, very true. Here's some supporting evidence for you. Fact: Trudeau government spent millions hiring influencers to push COVID narratives. Fact: during the Freedom Convoy, the government paid influencers to discredit protesters as racist and extremists. The government's anti-hate narratives largely focus on conservative viewpoints, but don't at all touch on left-wing extremism. The federal government does fund diversity training and disinformation watchdogs, which target predominantly conservative-leaning content. Or what about, our universities, right? It's kind of weird how there's so many people that are so radical, and either they're very old because all they watch is CBC and CTV, or they are still within the education system. Here is a fact. Canadian universities lean very, very left in faculty ideology and funding priorities. Professors who question climate policy, who question DEI, who question gender ideology, do and have faced backlash, job loss, and research funding cuts. The government funds programs that reinforce progressive narratives, while dissenting academics are not funded and are completely marginalized and criticized.
Such behavior is, sadly, a Canadian norm, particularly wherever the country is left-leaning, particularly where everyone believes axiomatically that we have all the virtues of our democratic compatriots to the south, and then some.
And for a government who is apparently so opposed to misinformation and disinformation and accuses the conservative-leaning Canadians and party members of being the ones to provoke such reactions, they certainly love using a lot of it, don't they? Because the Liberal government, there's a lot of evidence to support this, very much uses identity politics, racism accusations, and fear-mongering in order to gain support. In fact, in Trudeau's 2021 election campaign, he openly demonized unvaccinated Canadians. He called them misogynists. He called them racists. And another fact here, every single election cycle, the Liberals manufacture some sort of an existential crisis. This time around, Trump is a threat to our democracy and our sovereignty.
Mark Carney has been in charge of our economy for the last 5 years when he became Justin Trudeau's advisor. And what has been the result? Doubling the debt, printing $700 billion of inflationary cash, destroying the purchasing power of our money, shutting down pipelines that would have made us less reliant on the Americans so that they get all our oil and all our gas, a radical environmental agenda that sought to deliberately defund Canada's energy sector. That has been Mark Carney's radical agenda that Justin Trudeau has been implementing dutifully over the last 5 years.
So there is a very clear, very repetitive pattern here of the way that the Trudeau Liberal government works. Just listen to this.
AI could be an existential threat or a global opportunity, and it all depends on how we act now. I'm at the AI Action Summit to help shape it for the better.
Look at that. Yet another existential threat. Like clockwork, their plan is always the same. However, here's where I want to point you to a school of thought that I've had as of late. The government and media very frequently tries to get you to focus on a feeling or a symptom without actually addressing the cause. They're getting you to pay attention to the symptom that the cause creates. Generations of indoctrination has very much trained and manipulated us to think of symptoms of a particular issue as what the problem is, which can leave people then not even asking about what the cause is. It can leave people to not even remotely come close to addressing it. So here's an example for you to use. Climate change and natural disasters. The symptom is there's wildfires, there's hurricanes, there's extreme weather events. Oh, clearly it's climate change. What they want you to feel about this is guilt and fear. They want you to blame yourself. They want to blame your carbon footprint. But the cause of these events is actually poor forest management, it's arson, it's natural climate cycles. But all of those things are very rarely discussed, and the government solution instead is more taxes and more control over your personal consumption, more control over your personal freedoms. And speaking directly towards Justin Trudeau and his obsession with misinformation and disinformation, here is the symptom. Misinformation and disinformation are a growing threat to our democracy. We must regulate social media and online speech to protect Canadians. What they want you to feel, again, is fear, vulnerability. They want you to believe that independent media, alternative voices, critics of the government are dangerous, and therefore they must be silenced. What's the cause, though? Because the real threat, it's actually government control over speech. Justin Trudeau has routinely used misinformation and disinformation as a weapon to shut down dissent. Not because what they're saying isn't true. In fact, most of the time, what those voices are saying is actually correct.
But when Meta or the Bank of America decide that one of their users or account holders has voiced the wrong opinion, they can take action that the vast majority of us will never know about. They can suppress an algorithm, remove a book from the digital shelf, suspend a checking account, which raises a very frightening prospect. We do not even know that our freedom is being taken away.
This same government used those symptoms to cause a reaction and make people support them based on the feeling, not the reality. Because that same government lied about the Freedom Convoy, and that same government pushed debunked narratives in order to get you to comply. Now, because we have let that happen for so long, because we didn't want to get canceled, we didn't want people to dislike us, we were scared to speak up. Now that same government is controlling what we are able to hear and see.
And then in Canada, there's actually life imprisonment as a potential punishment for
what's the end of these laws and these efforts? Is it total political power? Is it just the easy eradication of dissent? What is the goal?
Yeah, I mean, total information control is definitely the goal. They want to control the information and also shape how people understand it. That's why they talk about narrative control.
So misinformation and disinformation is a label that Justin Trudeau and his team have very regularly used to discredit anything that they don't like. And you see this. You have seen the brainwashing effect of people who, if you do share any views that go against the mainstream, people will come into your comments and they will say things like this. You're lying, misinformation, disinformation. But what you're saying is true. They just don't like it. But they have been trained and brainwashed to use the same sorts of language and rhetoric that the government has been training them to use. The biggest threat about any of this is a government that thinks they have the right to decide what is true and what is not. And at this same summit where you just heard Justin Trudeau say that, it could be an existential threat, misinformation and disinformation. Here's what J.D. Vance from Donald Trump's camp, vice president, had to say about this exact same threat.
Many of our most productive tech companies are forced to deal with the EU's Digital Services Act and the massive regulations it created about taking down content and policing so-called misinformation. And of course, we want to ensure the internet is a safe place. But it is one thing to prevent a predator from preying on a child on the internet, and it is something quite different to prevent a grown man or woman from accessing an opinion that the government thinks is misinformation. Nor will it occur if we allow AI to become dominated by massive players looking to use the tech to censor or control users' thoughts. And I'd ask if you step back a moment and ask yourself, who is most aggressively demanding that we, meaning political leaders gathered here today, do the most aggressive regulation? It is very often the people who already have an incumbent advantage in the market. And when a massive incumbent comes to us asking us for safety regulations, we ought to ask whether that safety regulation is for the benefit of our people or whether it's for the benefit of the incumbent. Now, over the last few years, we've watched as governments, businesses, and nonprofit organizations have advanced unpopular and, I believe, downright ahistorical social agendas through AI. In the U.S., we had AI image generators trying to tell us that George Washington was black or that America's doughboys in World War I were in fact women. Now, we laugh at this now, and of course it was ridiculous, but we have to remember the lessons from that ridiculous moment. And what we take from it is that the Trump administration will ensure that AI systems developed in America are free from ideological bias and never restrict our citizens' right to free speech. We can trust our people to think, to consume information, to develop their own ideas, and to debate with one another in the open marketplace of ideas.
I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please comment your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel. Follow me on other social media platforms as well. And if you liked this video, hit that like button because that helps YouTube show it to more people or something. I don't know. That's what people tell me at least. So I will talk to you very, very soon.